We are joined this evening by Dr. Janet Woodcock, Acting FDA Commissioner, and Dr. Peter Marks, Director of FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. First, we will hear remarks from Dr. Woodcock and then Dr. Marks. Following their remarks, we will open up for questions. With that, let's turn over the press conference to Dr. Woodcock.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you all for joining. Today is an important day as the FDA announced the expansion of the emergency use authorization for the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for the prevention of COVID-19 to include adolescents down to 12 years of age. This will allow the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices to consider this topic at their meeting this Wednesday, May 12th. We know this is a big step for our country. Vaccinating a younger population brings us closer to returning to a sense of normalcy and to ending the pandemic. Now, parents and guardians can rest assured that in making our decision, the agency undertook a rigorous and thorough review of all available scientific data, as we have with all the COVID-19 vaccine authorizations. Dr. Marks will elaborate a bit more on our process for reviewing the vaccine. I would like to stress that teens, parents, and communities can have full confidence in our processes for reviewing this vaccine. FDA has done everything we can to ensure that the COVID-19 vaccines we've authorized have met the agency's high standards for quality, safety, and effectiveness. We know that every time an American, including members of our own families, receives a COVID-19 vaccine dose, you're putting your trust in us. And we're humbled by this trust and are working hard every single day to maintain it. As parents consider vaccines for their children, we recognize you may have questions about what the FDA's processes are and whether this vaccine is safe for your child. Similar to other vaccine authorizations, we will be posting a number of documents about how we reached the decision, frequently asked questions, and fact sheets for healthcare providers and vaccine recipients and their caregivers, which will be translating into numerous other languages. This level of transparency should help instill confidence in parents' decisions to have their children vaccinated against COVID-19. Getting more of our population vaccinated is critical to moving forward and past this pandemic. While children generally have milder symptoms from COVID-19, they're not immune to this virus. Through April of 2021, approximately 1.5 million children 11 through 17 years old were diagnosed with COVID-19. Reopening our schools and communities is at the top of minds of many families, and getting our children vaccinated to prevent COVID-19 will help our children and families get back to a sense of normal. Please get your COVID-19 vaccine and help your family and friends get theirs. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Dr. Marks.
Thank you, Dr. Woodcock. It's a pleasure being here with all of you today. First, I want to reiterate that this important step the agency is taking is guided by science, which drives our evaluation and decision-making process. Having a vaccine authorized for a younger population is a critical step in continuing to lessen the immense public health burden caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to share more about FDA's review process for this vaccine, which, as Dr. Woodcock noted, is also outlined in a number of documents that will be available on the FDA website. To evaluate the safety of the vaccine, the FDA looked at a clinical trial of more than 2,000 adolescents aged 12 through 15 years of age. Half of the participants received the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine and half received a saline placebo. More than half of the participants were followed for safety for at least 2 months after they received the second dose of the vaccine. The side effects seen in adolescents ages 12 through 15 were similar to those experienced by individuals 16 and older. While some individuals experience side effects following any vaccination, everyone's experience isn't the same, and some may not experience any side effects at all. The public should rest assured that safety monitoring will continue. As part of today's authorization, the company is required to continue to collect data about the clinical trial participants and other vaccinated individuals, and so will be able to quickly identify any potential safety issues. To evaluate vaccine effectiveness, the FDA evaluated data about how participants' immune systems responded to the vaccine. The agency looked at data from 190 vaccinated individuals aged 12 through 15 and compared that information to the immune response of 170 vaccinated individuals ages 16 through 25. The FDA also evaluated cases of COVID-19 among adolescents 12 through 15 years old 7 days after the second dose was given. No cases of COVID-19 occurred among the 1,005 adolescents who received the vaccine, compared to 16 cases in 978 placebo recipients, thus indicating the vaccine was 100% effective in preventing COVID-19 in this trial. These data add to the clinical data the agency evaluated for the initial authorization of this vaccine, as well as the real-world information we have following the administration of about 138 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine across this country. Based on all this available information, the FDA determined the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has met all of the criteria required to amend the EUA. We've concluded that the known and potential benefits of this vaccine in individuals 12 years of age and older outweigh the vaccine's known and potential risks. Parents may be wondering about how this vaccine will be different for their children from the COVID-19 vaccine that they themselves received. There's no difference in the way that the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine will be administered to those 12 through 15 years of age. And if endorsed for use by the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, it will be administered as a series of 2 doses, 3 weeks apart, using the same dose that is currently being given to adults. We continue to work diligently to protect the health and safety of all Americans. At the FDA, we are committed to making decisions that are guided by science that people can trust. We know that working together, we will overcome this challenge. I'd like to now turn the press conference back over to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Woodcock and Dr. Marks. At this time, we will begin the question and answer portion of the press conference. Our first question comes from David Lim at Politico. A reminder to start your video and unmute.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. FDA announced this morning that it's convening an advisory committee meeting to discuss emergency use authorization standards for children on June 10th. Can you explain why the agency is holding that meeting a month from today, given the expansion of the Pfizer EUA to include children ages 12 to 15? FDA said that you would provide a status update at that meeting on your EUA approach for those 12 to 17. Is the June meeting going to focus more on COVID vaccines for children younger than 11 years old? And is the agency considering different authorization standards for that population due to varying risk-benefit considerations for kids?
Good questions. I'm going to refer that to Dr. Marks.
And thanks so much for that great question, David. It is exactly as you've said. For the 12 to 15-year-olds, we've used an approach called immunobridging, which we've done frequently with vaccines, and we're very comfortable with the data that we have in the 12 to 15-year-olds who will be receiving the same dose schedule as adults. As we get down to younger children, age 11 and below, different doses of the vaccine will need to be used. And there are also different benefit risk considerations because we know that younger children have been susceptible to this interesting multi-inflammatory syndrome with COVID-19. And we have to make sure that we're not going to see anything untoward in the youngest children. So exactly as you say, we'll describe at that June 10th meeting the considerations we use for the 12 to 15-year-olds. But most important will be the discussion of our criteria that we'll use for the younger children, just as you've noted.
Yes, and I would add, this is Janet Woodcock, that the ACIP will be discussing this particular age group on Wednesday, so there'll be a public discussion there.
Our next question comes from Maggie Fox at CNN.
You're muted.
Sorry.
That's okay.
This appears to have been a fairly easy decision for FDA. Can you talk about how the data led you to this decision? And I do have a second question only because people are really asking, when can we expect doctors to begin administering this vaccine? People are a little unclear on whether it's okay to go ahead now or whether they really need to wait for the ACIP and the CDC. Thanks.
Thank you. I think with the ACIP, I think it'll be reasonable for people to hear that discussion. It's just on Wednesday, and so we can have a public discussion by immunization experts. The authorization by FDA is in place now. Dr. Marks, do you want to?
Right. Thanks very much. So I think I can pick up here and say that in terms of the data that went behind this, you're correct in that it was a relatively straightforward decision. The data involved both data from immunobridging, that is immune response in 190 12 to 15-year-olds who were given the vaccine compared to 170 who had were individuals ages 16 through 25. The response to the vaccine was excellent. And in fact, it was even better in the younger age group than in the 16 to 25 age group. Additionally, we had clinical data in terms of field data of cases of COVID-19. And in 1,005 of the children 12 to 15 who were vaccinated with the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, there were no cases of COVID-19, whereas there were 16 in those who received placebo. And that excellent efficacy was part of this. And then finally, the safety profile was very similar in the 12 to 15-year-olds as in the 16 to 25-year-olds. And for that matter, the safety profile in the 16 to 25-year-olds was very similar to that in the population up to age 55. So altogether, a relatively straightforward decision, but still one that was very carefully reviewed to make sure that all of the data supported this regulatory action.
Our next question comes from Karen Weintraub of USA Today. Please remember to unmute your phone and put your camera on. Our next question comes from Riley Griffin at Bloomberg.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Recent polling suggests that parents' willingness to vaccinate their 12 to 15-year-olds immediately post-authorization is quite low, and many might not facilitate their children's vaccination unless mandated. Are you concerned at all by that phenomenon, and what strategies are you, along with your counterparts at the CDC, going to use to build confidence in the vaccine, if at all? Thank you.
Well, part of it is our transparency. We're going to post all the information. The CDC is going to have a public discussion. I hope the press will help us with this as far as how important it is for people to get vaccinated and what we have seen and as what we've just been talking about in the safety profile and the effectiveness that we've seen of this vaccine. But of course, there may be some hesitancy, and Dr. Marks may have some more thoughts on this.
I would just encourage parents to ask their healthcare providers about the vaccine. The vaccine had an excellent profile in children, and though one can say that often children don't get terribly sick from COVID-19, there are kids who do get very sick from it. And in addition, they can bring it asymptomatically around to their grandparents and others. So this is part of the totality of getting our country protected against COVID-19, which is just waiting around the corner to come have another wave if we don't get to a sufficient degree of vaccination. So it's, I think, from public health agencies, we're pretty serious about the need to get vaccination rates up. And I think hopefully we'll do so by answering people's questions and helping them to understand why it's so important rather than by any kind of mandate.
Our next question comes from David Begnaud of CBS News.
Good evening. Good evening. How soon should pediatricians expect to receive the vaccine so they can start administering it?
Yeah. Peter, Dr. Marks may want to speak about that question. The vaccine is still has its storage conditions and so forth that may make it difficult for it to be broken up into small aliquots to give to different private offices. Dr. Marks?
Yeah, so the Countermeasures Acceleration Group, that's the group that's helping to distribute the vaccine. They understand this need for appropriate storage of this, and they will be ensuring that there are a sufficient number of pharmacies, health centers that will be able to distribute this probably by later on this week. Obviously, the ACIP will be meeting on Wednesday. And I think the idea is that by shortly after that, children in the age 12 to 15 should be able to get vaccines at those sites.
Yeah, since it's the same dose and regimen as for everyone else, so it isn't as if we need something special and different. The instructions will be available and posted and so forth.
Our next question comes from Michael Ehrman from Reuters.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. What would you say to parents who are concerned about the trial size? The number of participants includes barely more than 1,000 who got vaccine in the age group.
Well, this is only 4 years worth of span, so actually there's quite a few children in each of those 4 years who were exposed, if you think about the entire lifespan. Also, this is just extending it down from 16 and 17-year-olds and getting further information. We got a lot of information in this trial, though, because there were actually many cases in the untreated group that got the placebo vaccine. So I think when you think of it that way, if you had this is only a 4-year slice that we're extending, right? And so we had quite a few children in each of these groups. Dr. Marks?
Yeah, I agree completely with what Dr. Woodcock said. And I also would say that we will continue our safety monitoring, and we have safety monitoring that's done through FDA and through CDC. CDC, and they can speak more to this, so they have the vaccine safety data link, which is on millions of children where they can get real-time or near real-time data. So we'll be monitoring very closely here.
Our next question comes from Ariel Cohen from Roll Call.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I'm wondering what the main way of distributing vaccines will be to kids in this age group. The Biden administration has mentioned pediatricians' offices as a main avenue, but not all kids necessarily have access to their pediatricians. So what else are you looking to do? Thanks.
Well, sure. Well, as we said, this vaccine is just the exact same dose and regimen as what has been given out already. So all those places, those pharmacies, those vaccine centers, all those sites can simply extend down to the younger age group. In addition, certainly some people who have, where their children have pediatricians would like their children to be vaccinated in their pediatrician's office, and their specific arrangements would have to be made because of the storage conditions of the vaccine. Dr. Marks?
No, that's nothing to add. There basically there will be various sites, and obviously some of these will depend on what sites can actually administer vaccines to that particular age range, because it depends from state to state. So there will be, though, we do understand that there will need to be an adequate number of locations. Some of this is handled by that countermeasures acceleration group to make sure that there are an adequate number of these sites around.
Our next question comes from Candace Choi of the Associated Press.
Hi, I have a question and just a follow-up on the last one. In the earlier data, the number of cases in the placebo group was 18. In the materials release, it says there were 16. Can you just explain the discrepancy in the two numbers? And also, why wouldn't a site that administers vaccines right now to 16 and older not be able to administer to children 12 to 15?
Dr. Marks.
So thanks. So first of all, when we go through the data, one of the reasons why it takes us time to do this is that we go on and confirm whether we believe every case has met the criteria. And that does mean that it's very common, very, very common that the numbers a company submits and the numbers that we come out with at the end of the day don't match exactly. That's inconsequential, really, in this case. It's still incredibly good efficacy. So that's just one of those things that happens because we tend to use very strict case definitions. The issue with 12 to 15-year-olds, I'm an adult internist, and generally as an adult internist in different states that I've practiced, there is a certain age range where we generally do not touch those children unless it's an emergency situation. And that varies from state to state. So some states may have locations that based on what they're licensed to be able to do, they'll be able to administer all the way down. Other places may have to be different sites. It may be that the local pharmacy will not be able to administer because they may not be able to give a vaccine to someone younger than 16 or 17 years of age. So that's the reason for that. It's not that we expect anything different at these sites. It's just a matter of what different places are expected to handle, and with good reason, because a 12-year-old is not the same emotionally as an 18-year-old. There is a difference there. So there may be differences from state to state that one sees and from location to location.
And our final question comes from Erica Edwards at NBC.
I guess I would just ask more about what you just said about differences between states. Can any, once this goes through the ACIP, can any state, can anyone actually, give this vaccine to children ages 12 and over? I'm still curious about what the differences are between states.
These are the state licensing boards, okay? They have Board of Pharmacy, Board of Medicine, or some relationship like that. And then there are different criteria under that, and local rules and regulations are what we're talking about. And they permit the conditions of practice. So the states regulate those conditions of practice. Now, some states have written broader orders for collaborative pharmacy agreements. And so that enables their pharmacies to administer but the terms of those agreements, excuse me, is what Dr. Marks is saying, may vary from state to state. They'll be very aware of those, though.
I didn't mean to confuse things here, because our approval here, I should say authorization, I apologize, our authorization is for across all of the United States, its territories, so it applies everywhere. It's
Right.
just who will administer the vaccine may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, because of we don't regulate the practice of medicine at FDA. We regulate these products, and so how they are administered may be regulated different in some states in terms of who can give a vaccine to a 12-year-old. And that's, again, with good reasons that states might decide that because a 12-year-old is different than a 16 or 17-year-old, they might decide that a different type of provider. Whereas in some states, it may be that there'll be one size fits all, again, depending on the nature of the sites administering the vaccine.
So if I have one last follow-up, given that if everything goes through on Wednesday, when could those first shots in arms be delivered to ages 12 and up?
We would assume that they could be as soon as Thursday.
Thursday, right.
Thank you.
This concludes today's press conference. A replay will be available on the FDA's YouTube page. Thank you and have a good night.